Ari, this is Geordie Prepper, and welcome to the first episode of Prepper's Perspective. The special guest for today, and the first guest is AspiePrepper. This is a prepper who I've been subscribed to for quite a while now. He does some really great stuff. So, welcome, Aspie.
Yeah, it's good to be on the show. Nice to talk to you.
So, do you just want to introduce yourself for those who maybe haven't found you online yet? Who you are, what you do.
My online identity originally was quite broad. I was on everything from Minds to YouTube to VidMe. Um, but what's happened is I've actually changed my focus. So now I'm focused more on Steemit and soon to be BitChute. I will post videos to YouTube, but I don't think there's much point in that anymore.
So, yeah, this YouTube partnership program fiasco has pissed a lot of people off, and they are seeking lots of alternatives. So, what led you to the name Aspie Prepper?
Well, I have Asperger's and I like prepping, so I put the two together.
And did you come to prepping because of any like experiences with Asperger's, or did you just want to briefly just say for those who maybe don't know what Asperger's is and how it's linked to your prepping?
Oh, well, essentially, if you have Asperger's, you're told the fact that you are quite, how should I put it, blunt and don't follow social bullshit is a disability. So you're basically raised in an environment where you're told that, there's something wrong with you, and they basically spend most of their time trying to change the way you naturally think, because we think in a different way, and it's basically considered a disability, even though personally I don't see it as that.
Yeah, and we see, that people with Asperger's are often in the news for doing some quite antisocial things. I mean, is that something that's just propaganda? I mean, how how
Uh,
how how does someone with Asperger's did they view themselves and others? I mean, is it a stigma, or do they treat people with Asperger's different?
oh, absolutely, absolutely. That's why there's so many cases of terrorism with people with Asperger's, because what you have to remember is if you have Asperger's, you basically account for 1% of the general population. And of course, every system is basically built so that people who play social games are rewarded over people that are perhaps more intelligent or physically stronger, if that makes sense. And so, as someone with Asperger's, you're constantly stuck in this kind of phase where you have to put up with all this social crap, and it's quite infuriating. And when you account for the fact that the unemployment rate for Asperger's people is about 90%, so it's those type of things that come together to form, how should I put it, a dislike of mainstream society. And when you take into account as well, a lot of people with Asperger's are bullied quite a lot. I mean, we're not, how should I put it, we're an underclass within society. I think that's the best way of putting it. So for me, if I went for a job and people found out I had Asperger's, I could be working on a machine, the machine could break, they'd turn around and look at me and say, your social skills are really causing a problem here, because it's always that's just something that's used. So if you look at a lot of famous people like that presenter who has Asperger's, he even says in his videos how his little documentary, that he had to pretend not to have it. So it's that type of thing that really has an impact on Asperger's individuals' mindset of how they see society.
Yeah, and it's really quite sad that there's a section of society that's got this, is beaten down and has this stigma around them, and that a condition that you couldn't help is used against you. I mean, we see that time and time again throughout lots of social classes. So
Well, it depends if you think it's a condition. I mean, for me personally, I don't see being able to see through all the social bullshit as so much of a problem. But I suppose everything's relative.
oh yeah, absolutely. And how did you find prepping, and how has prepping helped you to? Because you said that people with Asperger's see through all the bullshit, and I
Hmm.
think preppers and people who just want to be self-sufficient, they have this ability to cut through that as well. So how did how did you discover prepping, and how is that going to help you beat the system in a way, and get past the things the problems that the society's caused?
Right. Well, I've always thought the established order was a load of shit, even when I was young. Sitting in front of a blackboard because we had blackboards back in those days, and it's just like, well, why am I here? And I never understood it. A lot of things didn't make sense. Many of the things were obvious lies. I mean, look, I'm autistic, but that doesn't mean I can't see, you know, through the stupidity of certain lies. And some of them are really, really obvious. I don't know how the people out there can't see the control systems. For me, I started getting prepared before I realised I was actually preparing. So it was start off with basic things. So making sure I had some money spare, making sure I had items on me to protect myself, taking care of my security. I mean, that's how it really started, because you have to take care of your physical safety. That's basically paramount when you have Asperger's.
And
Now, obviously, that's branched into other things as well. For instance, growing my own food, and of course, developing some of my hobbies that I use to feed into prepping. So that's how I really began.
I think really that's really great, to be honest. I mean, if I could have went back and done it years beforehand and realized what was going on, then I would have. So it's really great that you were able to do this from such a young age. Like, so locally, where you are, do you see any problems? I mean, what are you prepping for locally and nationally? What do you think's going to hit us?
Well, I would say the three most likely scenarios. Nationally, I'd say pandemic and oppressive government. And locally, I would say local violence and civil unrest, and of course, oppressive local governments. That's what I would say the main threats are.
And what about this missile warning that was given in Hawaii? Do you think that was something that was testing this? Because it seems that they didn't they didn't retract it for such a long time. I mean, do you think they were trying to do some sort of social experiment and, as you say, maybe establish what it would take to cause unrest? Or
Oh, people do these things all the time. It really wouldn't surprise me if it was a social experiment. But then again, if you've actually seen pictures of the control panel, I mean, it's just basically a load of web links. So I don't know why they had that. You'd think they'd have a button that they press and some cover over the button to stop it being pressed. It sounds, a bit film-like, but it's certainly a more efficient way, that's for sure.
so, do you think the old saying that we're 3 meals away from total anarchy is something that's correct? Or
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people out there, I mean, a lot of preppers, we all talk about shit hitting the fan, but the reality is in the West, the shit has been hitting the fan for a very long time, but it's been doing it very, very slowly. I mean, I've been alive over 20 years and I've actually seen the decay of my own society. I've actually seen neighborhoods getting worse and getting more crime ridden, and then move into another neighborhood and then watching that become more and more crime ridden and more unrest. So I think that's something people need to bear in mind when it comes to prepping. I think it's already begun. If you look as well, the police are now arresting people for comments they put on Twitter, which I think is an absolute joke, if I'm perfectly honest.
so how do we protect ourselves? And what are you doing personally? How are you through your social media and through Steam, etc.? What is it that you're focusing on, and trying to influence people and trying to motivate them? What sort of area do you cover which could protect them?
Well, so far I've covered a broad area on Steamy. I've talked a bit about mind control. I've talked about emotional control. I've talked about how you can use electronics for prepping. I've also talked about pets and again just general prepping topics to introduce people to prepping. I've had a pandemic series and a cybersecurity series as well. So I cover a broad range of things. Recently, I've had some computer problems, but now I'm getting back into the posting trends. I'm going to start releasing videos again now that I have some better software. So I'm going to be putting those on BitChute, and they're going to be quite instructive. They're going to cover things like lock picking and organizational skills, pretty much anything.
Yeah, because that's one thing I noticed about your channel is the electronics aspect and building your own security alarms and motion detectors, which I think is really quite unique. We don't see people building things from scratch, but I mean, if you think about it, if you've got the parts lying around after shit hits the fan, then those sorts of skills are really quite unique and they're going to be sought after. So I think it's a really good area. And normally we just see people, they'll be doing some blacksmithing and things like that, which are all important skills. But if something hasn't destroyed all the electronics, then these are things that could be used. So internationally, I mean, are we going to see anything that could take out electronics completely? Do you think how serious do you think this EMP propaganda is? I mean, are we going to see one?
Well, there's always a potential for an electromagnetic pulse. There's two main scenarios. Obviously, there's the natural one where the sun has a mass ejection, and of course, there's the man-made one. From what I've seen, it does seem like a lot of saber rattling. I mean, what you have to understand is that our so-called leaders, I mean, when you look at all these societies, the leaders are basically all sat in their own sandbox, roaring at every other leader and shaking plastic spades at each other. They're not as intelligent or omnipotent as people believe. So I think the risk is mostly through miscalculation, but I doubt there will be any nuclear exchanges um, because the understanding of nuclear warfare has changed. Before, people believed that you could nuke the fuck out of someone, wait 2 weeks, and everything would be fine, and that's not the case. Even if India and Pakistan had a nuclear war and they used their nukes, which are quite small in comparison, all the dust and soot would go into the atmosphere and basically cause a mass starvation of the planet. So nuclear warfare isn't mad, it's sad, self-assured destruction.
So you mentioned sad, self-assured destruction, but there's people out there that really and truly believe that nuclear war is going to happen. So they have a very narrow tunnel vision and they only watch mainstream media. What do we do to bring people into the prepping fold and just make them aware that it's just a good insurance policy, basically? I mean, how do we do that?
Well, for the first part of the question, nuclear war isn't as likely as people think because leaders are rational. Even North Korea, I mean, the leader there is certainly a dictator, but what the country's doing does make rational sense given its geopolitical position. Now, when it comes to convincing the sheeple to become preppers, that is very difficult. What I find particularly amusing is that everyone preps to a certain degree. So, for instance, if you put a torch somewhere for when the power goes out, that's basically prepping on some level. And I think we need to focus on that and build it. So rather than viewing prepping as a distinct lifestyle, focus on prepping as a building block within a lifestyle. So maybe they start by putting some light sources away for when the power goes out and then move up from that. And I think we need to make it a constructive activity or a constructive mindset, because at the moment people often view prepping as a separate life, and that's not quite true. Prepping is part of your life, not a different life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've said on my channels that prepping shouldn't take over your life at all. It should just be something that runs alongside it. So do you think things like Hawaii are going to drive people to prepping? Are we going to see a massive upsurge in subscribers, or people just simply looking on how to protect themselves?
Yes, that is one of the advantages of the Hawaii-like situations that occur. It does make people think. Unfortunately, most people within a few days go back to their sheeple state and forget all about it. But those initial people who wake up and start thinking for themselves, that's why we put what we put out there so people can find us and begin that journey.
Yeah, because I mean, even if they go to Google and they just type in prepper, then they're obviously going to find a massive archive and catalog of various different channels that have got like hundreds of videos up there, which can all help them.
While having a lot of videos out there and material certainly helps, one thing that does worry me though is the amount of censorship. So if Google censors all of these things and there's like this kind of soft censorship of the internet, will these people be able to access the information when they need it? And one problem I've noticed is that when people need information, they can just go on the internet to find it. And if the shit does hit the fan, and A, the internet's down, or B, the information's censored, I'm wondering what effect that will have on people's survivability chances. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Protecting information and history and of combating censorship is a real big problem, I think, and it's something I've been thinking about. And we see online, people who make like doomsday rebuilding of society, like encyclopedias, electronic encyclopedias. But I mean, what if an EMP does happen, either naturally or man-made, and that's not an option? And we're basically essentially going to be teaching people how to read again and how to. I mean, even if books survive, I mean, what can we do to protect all this knowledge? And I think what we're doing now is clearly a threat. Otherwise, they wouldn't be censoring it. We see homesteading channels, prepping channels are shadow banned, and the information is not going to get seen by many, even though the people with the channels may think that their content's getting viewed. If you're shadow banned, then only very few people are going to see it. I think essentially people need to get back to the basics, basic skills, not relying on any sort of electronic sheet like a PDF to teach them how to do it. I think we need more practical and essential skills being taught and passed down through families. I mean, like the family Smith, it's all came from blacksmithing and other great family names here in Great Britain. They pass down a tradition to their sons and daughters, and I think it's a much more robust way of passing on information.
Absolutely. Although, in the current society where everyone is encouraged to be, little cogs in the machine, I think it is impossible at this point to achieve that in any meaningful, large-scale way. Although, as a small-scale solution amongst preppers, that is definitely an option.
So how do we beat this censorship then? What are you doing to beat the censorship? And if anybody is thinking about establishing a channel, I mean, how do they get around this censorship?
Well, the main thing to do, and before you do your channel, is to make sure you can't be doxxed. So I take extensive precautions. One thing I will warn people against is pulling their face on YouTube or in any video. And also, when you're shooting videos, be very, very careful about reflection showing your face as well. Don't leave any personal documents around that can be viewed by the camera. I mean, for me, that's basically all that's needed. Obviously, manage your online life well. Don't use the same email account for every social media profile you have. Use a different email and make sure it's a secure email. Try not to use your phone number if you don't well, if you can avoid it, don't give them your mobile number. That's my recommendation. In terms of privacy, I would recommend a book called How to Disappear from the Internet Completely. That's a good book, and I've used that to inform me on my survival online, so to speak, because obviously if you're doxxed, it will have an impact on your real world chances of surviving. Now, another recommendation, I'm just going to put this out there. If you are really paranoid about the government, you could wear gloves when you do your videos. And the reason for that is if you have a high quality camera, your fingerprints can actually be worked out from a high quality picture. But for me, I think that's unnecessary. And the truth is, if you're looking at prepping and survivalism and those type of sites, or even buying supplies that will show up in a database somewhere, let's be very honest, everything's connected in this world, and once you're in the computer, there's no going out of it. So I wouldn't worry too much about the government knowing you're a prepper. It's more about making sure the average person doesn't know you're a prepper. And don't forget to use VPNs as well. They're a necessity.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's something that I've mentioned on my channels many times, is the need for OPSEC, operational security. You know, once you put yourself out there in the internet, to a certain degree, no matter what precautions you take, you are giving away some of your privacy. So, but somebody on the other side of the planet, if a global disaster was to happen, they're not exactly going to find it easy to come to your front door, but your neighbours are. So keep what you're doing very secure and very private, because you just have to look, if a power cut goes out, people do knock on your neighbour's door just to see if you're okay. But if something was to happen for a very extended period and you're the only one that has a light on, or if you're the only one that seems to be well, you're not succumbing to any of the local issues, such as any like disease or anything like that, then people are going to start to look at you and they're going to think, well, what do they have which is protecting them from this? And then we may start to find that people are knocking on your door at first to see if you're okay, and then they're bashing down your door and breaking it down to take what you have. So just to sum up, and from your experiences, what would you say to someone who is maybe very young and has Asperger's, and what have those experiences taught you, and what would you say to someone who's perhaps going to go through what you went through? What would you tell yourself if you could go back?
Well, there's only really one thing that I can say in a concise way, and that's don't give in, essentially. I mean, look, I could do a whole video, well, several videos on that topic alone. My number one piece of advice would be, don't let the bastards get you down, essentially. Don't allow society to dictate what you are capable of. You know, everyone will be trying to, or pretending to help you, while they'll really be trying to actually, you know, do you down. A lot of the time, you're offered help, but they're not really there to help you. So focus on your strengths. Don't beat yourself up too much about your weaknesses, and just don't be ashamed of being different. You know, it is inevitable. You will be picked on at some point. Everyone is, I think. I think it's just a part of life. But don't let that set your identity. You know, your identity is separate from people's opinions, and the only opinion that matters is your opinion of yourself. Because the truth is, everyone just uses their opinion of you to control you anyway, if I'm perfectly honest.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's some great advice. And if people are looking to get into prepping, do you think prepping is a very worthwhile thing to do? I mean, why should we even bother to prep?
Well, it's like saying, why should we bother to make sure we have enough food in the fridge for 3 days? It's like saying, why should we bother to wear winter clothes in winter? I mean, look, it's your life. Obviously, you have a choice. But if you're unprepared, you're going to be in a pretty shit position, that's for sure. For those people, I'm talking about the British people who are listening here, a lot of you will live in flood areas. If you're prepared, you won't need to wait in that goddamn line for that chemical water that they give you from those, those big blue containers, Geordie, that they give to flood victims so they can get water.
The
You won't need,
Bowsers.
you won't need to stand in that line, and that's in itself can be just worth it. You don't need a massive amount of stuff, just some water. Start off with some water, some food, and a few basic supplies, and you're ahead of most of the population automatically.
Well, thanks to my special guest here, AspiePrepper. That's some great information that's came from him. So thank you for being on the very first episode of Prepper's Perspective.
Well, it's been good talking to you. I hope people found this useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure they will. And this is Geordie Prepper. This has been Prepper's Perspective with AspiePrepper. Take care, everyone.